Some of you might have missed the first panel this morning, and we talked about urban transportation modes. And we're going to focus specifically on car sharing for this thing. And we've got, again, some of the world's greatest experts here. Paul Hetke next to me from Qualcomm and their business solutions. Next to him is Rick Hutchinson from City Car Share, Mark Norman from Zipcar, and my good friend Susan Shaheen from UC Berkeley Transportation. So, I've got questions for everybody. The way this is going to work, I ask everybody hard questions. I take copious notes, and then I come back with the really, really hard questions. So, Paul, Qualcomm is known for, if you guys don't know who Qualcomm is, there's a Google search for you, but you'll be using a Qualcomm chip to do that Google search, I promise you. Smartest kids in the room. So telematics is pervasive now in the automotive sphere. We've got BMW here, and they think they're doing it right. We've got, or not BMW, Mercedes-Benz, BMW thinks they're doing it right. We think we're doing it right. You see what Ford's doing it. So what do you see, how do you see the intersection of telematics and automobiles in 10 years? And how do you see the space between the providers and the automakers emerging?
Well, the word pervasive, I like that word. It's not as pervasive. Connected cars, and I'll use that term instead of telematics. Telematics has some connotations, of kind of being limited to safety and security services and unlocking your door, whereas I think the terminology is kind of broadening as more infotainment kind of services are enabled to connected cars. So in terms of connected cars, would love them to be much more pervasive than they are, because from our perspective, every connected car is got one of our chipsets in it, or has the opportunity for us to put one of our chipsets in. So, but it is becoming much more pervasive, Bill, as you point out. But still today, there are approximately 80 million automobiles produced on the planet will be this year, and less than 10% will actually have connectivity built into them. So it's more pervasive than it was, but there's still a long ways to go, I think. From an automaker's perspective, in terms of connected car programs, it kind of varies. Some automakers see the connectivity, the connected car, their connected car program as a way to, and I'm going to harken back a little bit to a comment you made this morning, or a question you asked this morning's panel about who owns the customer. Some of the automakers look at the connected car services as a means to establish a much closer relationship with the consumer, with the customer. Because if you think about it, for most of us as consumers, when we go purchase an automobile, we go to a dealer. We don't actually interact with the automaker themselves. We interact with a dealer for the automaker. We purchase the car, and then going forward, all of our service generally is done with that dealer, which is typically an independent business from the automaker. So many of the automakers that we interact with, of course, and they're the ones that are putting connectivity in a car, they see these services as an opportunity to establish a continuous running relationship with the consumer, where they're offering services that are branded, for example, Mercedes Embrace service, BMW Assist, and so on, BMW Connected Drive. These kind of programs allow the automaker to establish a running relationship. And also, obviously, the connectivity can be used, and it is, by various automakers to collect information about how the drivers are using the cars. So the automaker can learn something about consumer usage of the automobile and factor that information into the next version of the automobile in terms of user experience or features and so on, and how, and even fundamentally how the consumer operates the vehicle. So, there's these kind of different approaches depending on the automaker. Some of the automakers, as I think are very well known, provide the service themselves. So they not only deliver the metal, and as you were referring to this morning, as an automobile, delivering the metal, but they're also delivering the service themselves. They implement it themselves. Others outsource it to a third party, and so it's not quite as bundled into their business model. It's more outsourced, so it really kind of varies.
I'd like to follow on with a question about that. So in my world, in the metal world, our product cycle is 6 to 8 years. Okay. And it's a long version. And in some of the looking ahead's 10, 15 years out. But when I worked for Hewlett-Packard, and I worked with Hewlett-Packard and then came to Toyota, our product cycle was 3 to 6 months, and we were cannibalistic. The next product was designed to obsolete the one it was replacing. How are these cultures ever going to understand each other? What happens there?
Yeah, well, that has been obviously an issue for the auto industry. In fact, I remember, I've been dealing with the auto industry now for almost 10 years, and I remember a lot of times, 5, 6, 7 years ago, the very first things, words that would come out of the mouths of the people in the auto industry, of a particular company that I was meeting with is, why doesn't the wireless industry give us even the time of day? Why do they ignore us? And in fact, the big issue at the time, and you're probably well aware of it, Bill, was simply Bluetooth pairing of phones with the hands-free system in the car. That was such a headache for the auto industry because Bluetooth was such a not completely defined standard that it left that the handset makers define a lot of the profiles and how they work. So every handset, not all handsets work the same way, and so the auto industry had to deal with that. And it was a nightmare for the auto industry. So, and then to your point about the life cycles. So even for us, Qualcomm, we ship over 500 million chipsets a year to the consumer device industry. And those devices, as you point out, your experience with Hewlett-Packard, have a life cycle of 18 months, well, a development cycle of, say, 12 months, and then a life cycle of another, say, 18 months or 2 years, and then they're trashed, basically. Automobile, to your point, has a life cycle of 10 to 15 years, and the development cycle is 3 years. So from the time, for us, for example, from the time an automaker, engineer, or their tier 1 supplier in most cases, picks up one of our chipsets, drops it onto a schematic, to the time that first wheel's on the road with that chipset in it, that's 3 years. So by that time, we're quite a few cycles down the path already in terms of, the technology incorporated into the next generation chipset. So we actually have had to react to that by extending the life cycle of our chipsets for the auto industry specifically, and we in fact have done that because our typical life cycle of one of our chipsets is 3 years, maybe 4 years. But for the auto industry, we put a minimum floor of 7 years under those selected chips that we offer to the industry in order to accommodate that life cycle, because there's a 3-year development cycle, typically another 3 to 4 years of manufacturing, with that particular chipset, going into production cars. So you're looking at about 7 years, and then you have warranty support after that even. So yeah, so it's a very different life cycle, even from a purely obsolescence perspective, and from a technology perspective, the automobile sort of gets left behind rather quickly, given the a 10 to 15 year life cycle by the wireless technology industry. Matt was describing, where things are going in the future here and over the next few years. For the auto industry to keep up with what's happening just on the network side. It's difficult. It's difficult for them. The networks are moving along. They get left behind fairly quickly because of the long life cycle of the automobile.
Okay, great. We'll come back to that. Rick Hutchinson, CEO of City Car Share. Here in the Bay Area, not-for-profit car share. Rick's in charge of just about everything. We talk to him a lot. We like him. Hard question for you, Rick. Is there a role for electric cars? Like the little one you saw out here today, little 2. Is there a role for the electric car in car sharing, and what are the hurdles?
Well, I'll give that a qualified absolutely. There's a role for electric vehicles in car sharing for a couple of reasons. The major one is that car sharing exists to solve some social, environmental, and equity issues that exist in our communities. Anything that is going to lead us to reduce CEO and greenhouse gas emissions, but also to introduce communities to new and innovative technology is very important. So with car sharing, when you have an electric vehicle in a car sharing network, you have the opportunity to have many people use an electric vehicle as compared to one person buying an EV and one person using it. What we've experienced so far, we have about 20 electric vehicles in our fleet. We've had, in the last 6 months, almost 1,000 unique users of those vehicles. So that's 1,000 people who have been exposed to electric vehicles, can become more comfortable with it. And as importantly for us, we're learning a lot about what it means to have and to manage an electric fleet. So we can build best practices over time. We can share it with other car sharing organizations. We can share it with fleet management, and we can determine how to better integrate the coming evolution of vehicles, at least the automobile, and especially with the electric vehicles. As for barriers, there's two main barriers. One of them is an operational barrier. We have to have infrastructure. We have a lot of chicken and the egg thing going on here. You have to put in charging station infrastructure in order to have cars that can be charged. You need to have the cars, and quite frankly, cars at an affordable level that car sharing organizations can eventually make money on. And so we're struggling with that right now. There has to be a balance. So there's also operational issues, as Mark knows, and how people use it. And that brings me to the second barrier. It's overcoming mindsets. It's helping people become more comfortable, understand the utility, the function of electric vehicles, and how they can, quite frankly, meet their needs, but also be good for the community. And that's going to take some time. It's going to take time to have people feel comfortable.
Is there a different profile between your subscribers who actually prefer the electric car over the gas car? Is there a different profile, different person, and do you market to them differently? Will you market to them differently?
Well, that's a great question. We have only limited and anecdotal information on this. We have people who are super users. They're going out of their way to find certain cars. So we have 10 converted Priuses, and we have and a Volt as a PHEV. We have Mitsubishi, Ford, Nissan electric vehicles, and we have people who are already determining what they like. So even if it's not the closest vehicle, they will go and take the one that they think is going to meet their needs. So what we're finding is, again, from a utility point of view, PHEVs make a lot of sense for people who are going on longer distance and longer duration trips. But if they are just doing the most common car sharing trip, which is short distance, short duration, they'll pick a smaller car in the city, quite frankly. They may go for whatever is the most compact and easiest one to get around in. And they care less about whether it's a PHEV or an EV.
And one last question about this. Do you see city car share, and this would be something for Mark to think about too, do you see yourselves as getting in the role of infrastructure maintenance, infrastructure management? How does that work?
By default, we are. There are more companies going into this space that we will utilize on an outsourced basis. But at this point, it is so small that part of the learning process here is to understand what we'll need to do to maintain that infrastructure. For us, we are putting infrastructure in specifically for city car share cars, but in most of the real estate, or most of the developments or garages we put it in, we're also offering to put in a publicly available charging station as well, so that they can offer it to other people parking in their garages. So in some cases, we're actually sharing maintenance requirements with those facilities, and that's been pretty well received at this point. The other point I'll make in regards to that is this idea of the connected car. With EVs, it's going to be much more important that we have information about charging, about usage, about where they're going, not specifically where they're going, but how far they go and what the needs are. Getting information from the car on a real-time basis is critical in order to scale.
So, Mark Norman, Zipcar president. If there were a Xerox name in car sharing, it's certainly a Zipcar. I think if anybody thinks about car sharing now, that name is, high on the list. So Mark used to, back in history, there was really FlexCar and Zipcar, and they really had at each other tooth and nail, and kind of were chasing the same customer, and chasing the same territory. And Mark was CEO of FlexCar. He came there from Chrysler of Canada, and finally they had the good sense to shut the war down and became one big company. And Mark's now president of Zipcar. And I think I don't really need to. You guys have been around enough that you know who Zipcar is, and you can't walk in any city in the United States without tripping over a Zippy. So, question for you, Mark. And this is going to be another question here for Susan in a different format. But question for you, Mark. From a policy perspective, what's needed to start and maintain a car sharing program?
Thanks for having me. I think getting tattooed with Xerox early might be a little tough, but I haven't bought paper in a long time. But and it's funny to think. I mean, Susan and I met in the early days when Flex and Zip were blowing their brains out for sort of who's bigger, and we used to say to the press, it's like two kids in kindergarten arguing over who's taller, and they both want to play football in college, kind of thing. So clearly the industry, and Rick knows this too, I mean, is very much in its infancy. Low barriers to entry, to your question, high barriers to scale, to Rick's points on electric vehicle usage. So what does it take to get started? You heard from the panel this morning, there are more and more mobility options in general with apps on your phone, and more car sharing options for any of you really wherever you live. I mean, and it used to be, and it was a few short years ago where it was only available in big cities with a satchel of public money. And now it is ubiquitously available in big cities with big piles of private money. There are also alternative deployment models, whether it's peer-to-peer that helps deploy in a less dense area, helps us get into more suburban and outlying areas that wouldn't have had the density or the asset turn to support traditional car sharing. But you even see it in some of the things that we're doing with fleet sharing. You heard Scott talk about ZevNet at UC Irvine. You've seen, we've announced work that we're doing with our technology in City of Houston-owned cars. So they've got 24 Leafs in operation with our vehicles. So in a way, that's almost like peer-to-peer, but within the same work group sharing of our technology in their cars. So between peer-to-peer, between city usage, and then what we're doing on college campuses, the barriers are lower than ever to get into car sharing and walk the talk. So for policymakers or for business leaders to say, what would it take to share my fleet to be more efficient? What would it take to have our small suburban enclave on the map as a green behaving operator? Just wasn't really that thinkable even 5 years ago, and the barriers are lower than ever. I will say, from a policy standpoint, there are a couple things that help be more hospitable. How you think about on-street permitting and parking is important. How you think about taxes, and so many cities are used to rental taxes funding new stadiums, but in fact, it's really taxing the behaviors that we're trying to encourage, which is living car light, not car less. There's lots of great things to do in a car, but to complement this great intermodal infrastructure, University of DePaul did a study and showed that the effective tax rate on car sharing in many of North America's large cities were higher than that on tobacco and alcohol, other sin taxes. And you sort of say, scratch your head and go, is that the behavior that we're trying to encourage, but we're taxing it like smokes? Doesn't make sense. So there are a few things that policy can do to be more hospitable, but the lift is lower than ever to bring car sharing near your place of business or place of residence.
So my my good buddy Robin Chase is unable to join us today, but Susan is here, and it's a question for you, Susan. We'll get back to another issue here, but this one I want to ask you. How does peer-to-peer car sharing exist in this space? Okay, is it the next frontier, or are we going to continue to see the traditional rented model dominate?
Great question. So I think there's room for both. And I think that the huge opportunity with peer-to-peer, I think it's, one of our holy grails, right, in the car sharing industry is how do we get car sharing out of the densest urban cities into suburban areas? And it's a really interesting model in that you don't have the high capital costs that Zipcar, City Car Share, and other car sharing organizations face, but you do have other obstacles like fear of sharing, insurance considerations, and that type of thing. But it has the ability to go into so many locations that traditional car sharing or neighborhood car sharing models would have trouble getting to, or it would take them so much longer to get to. So I see them as very complementary models. And also, I mentioned earlier in the first panel, this idea that I've had is, why can't shared use follow us through our lifestyle? We start on college campuses and move into dense urban areas a lot of times after we graduate from college. And then we get married and we have kids. And maybe car sharing can't reach us in those locations. But are there other shared use models that can follow us through the lifestyle and life cycle phases of our lives, including taking us all the way to the baby boomer era and beyond as we grow older? So I see them as very, very complementary models. And I hope there's less fighting than we saw in the early days of car sharing, with the models. I think that stuff's all getting sorted out. But I do think we need to talk more.
Okay, so because I'm going to use the chairman's prerogative here and ask some car-oriented questions. So this is for Mark. You see a lot of the OEMs now getting involved with their own personal signature car sharing. And Toyota's no different. I mean, we're all looking at getting involved in car sharing. With the OEMs comes enormous capabilities, enormous manufacturing capabilities, but also comes a tremendous amount of overhead that you got to pay. Now, my guess is that as one of the goals of Zipcar is you've reduced, and City Car Share, you've reduced your overhead down to a minimum. Can the OEMs compete?
You can do anything with enough money.
I mean, compete and make money.
The answer is that remains to be seen. The models are, it is an asset-intensive business. One of the things that we did in going public last year was build a compelling case at 3 levels of unit economics. Member economics, does a member drive profitable returns over their lifetime? Vehicle economics, does a car generate cash flow? And city economics, how does it roll up to make something that makes sense? And that's one of the things that we've been able to show on college campuses, for example, is that you don't have to have hundreds of cars to get used to make an enclave on a college campus be profitable. Can they make money? I don't know, but there are other factors. You and I have talked about this. There are regulatory pressures that enter into a corporate financial equation that may trump unit economics in a car sharing operation. So I think at their core, the best OEMs, and we have great respect for Toyota, really as a lead among them, and I'm not just blowing smoke. We've done things with EVs dating back to 2003 with Bill and the team at Toyota, but they are very good at design and packaging and powertrain efficiency, and have not historically been great service providers. Just hasn't been their core business. We are trying to build a business at Zipcar around purpose-built processes and being the most efficient at scale for this business that is truly disruptive. It's very different from rental even, that is very pod or depot dependent. Lots of throughput of a lot of cars and a lot of labor through a certain site. Everything is self-service and distributed, and to a degree upends a lot of things that a lot of traditional large, even rental companies are good at. And I know Rick lives this too. But.
Okay, one last OEM question. This is for everybody, and we'll start here with Paul, and let's go down the line. I brought the cars up, the IQ EV and the Think City. I didn't bring them up just because we had nothing to do with the cars. I brought them up because you guys are experts in the audience from all over the world, and I was curious if I was going to design, or if the guys that work with me are going to design a perfect car for car sharing, what elements of those cars, if any, would you incorporate would you tell me to incorporate? What do I take back to our design engineers? Let's start with you.
Well, I had the opportunity to chat with you about that bill down there, so I'll steal a little bit of that conversation. You know, a vehicle that's easy to maintain, easy to keep clean, or that almost keeps itself clean. Obviously, it's a vehicle that's very reliable for a car sharing vehicle. I think is going to be very important. And you know, for me, as I was describing, if I pull out my smartphone and I want to use a vehicle to go somewhere, you know, I put in some criteria of what that trip is, you know, and my smartphone's got the information or algorithms on it and access to the database about the vehicles in the vicinity. That's all fine and good, and that's probably pretty straightforward, you know, in terms of how the business would operate. But I want to know actually more than that, and I think Mark, you talked about this a little bit. People will sort of gravitate to a certain type of car for a couple of reasons. You know, one thing, we're all, sorry about that, speaking of phones. We're all somewhat use an automobile to kind of convey who we are, you know, to a degree. And I think that came up this morning as well in your earlier panel. So it's a bit of an image thing. So what kind of car I drive might be important to me. You know, what does it look like? You know, is it clean? And when I get in the vehicle, is it clean? So going kind of back to my perception or view really of the car sharing, the whole car sharing concept is having that connectivity and the sensors, if you will, or the ability to detect what kind of shape the car is in, what kind of car. Obviously, I typically would know what kind of car it is, but I would want to be able to see, is this car got a bunch of, you know, gum wrappers all over in it, or someone's rotting sandwich in the back seat, you know, that the last person left. You know, so I want to be able to see an image of the interior of that car. I want to be able to to know what this thing looks like, at least to a degree. You know, it's not, you know, covered in dust or mud or something, and I have to get in and drive this thing. I'll be able to see through the windshield, you know, for example. So I think, from my perspective, the automobile would have to have not only the materials, you know, as we were talking about earlier, that are easy to clean, but also the technology in the vehicle, sensor technology, and the connectivity, and enough battery to support that connectivity, where I can get an image of the interior of that car and whether I really want to even go seek this car out and use it. You know, is it going to be acceptable to me when I arrive at the location, and things like that. So I think not only is it just whether the batteries or what the charge is on the battery if it's an EV, or you know how much fuel is in the vehicle and so on, but it's things like that which certainly can be determined. That information can be gathered and presented to the potential user right there on his smartphone in real time. And I think that will be an important aspect of all of this for the consumer.
Rick, what do you think now after seeing those cars? Is there anything there that grabs your imagination? Or?
Yeah, as far as cars are concerned, it's about user experience. And the fact is that with car sharing, we are trying to promote multimodal transportation. So you should be looking at walking, biking, public transit, other shuttles, and obviously utilizing cars. So you've got a variety of experience among those options. If you're going to be in a shared car, you have a different responsibility than if you're in your own car. So anything that's going to both heighten your awareness of that responsibility, but also provide, you know, quite frankly, a reason to stay with car sharing is important. The connected car is critical. If we were going to ask the OEMs to change one thing, it was give us more access to the ODBC and the CAN bus connection, so that computer that is on wheels driving around the street can provide more information so we can make a better user experience for people. There's lots of little things over the years that we've shared. I know Zipcar shared with the OEMs on little things that matter for cars. In the early days, on some Toyota cars, we noticed that on the gas cap, they were being the lever was opening so much that they were braking. We gave that little kind of thing, we gave feedback to Toyota on that so that they could strengthen that. So I use that kind of minor, not very important example to say that car sharing is different. And therefore, with lots of people using a car constantly over time between effectively 8 to 12 hours a day in a single car, mostly at short distances, that car is going to be used differently. We need to have more information about it, about the use.
And Mark, how do you?
Totally agree with everything you guys said. Making it really seamless and easy and simple is what makes car sharing, not giving up a car, but getting access to a whole network of cars. And the more seamlessly you can port your profile between cars, the more engaging and personal and less stressful, frankly, it's going to be. I mean, we talked this morning about just discovering transit in a new city and how it's hard. I mean, you have that awkward pause in front of the machines that spit out cards and stuff, and the first 10, maybe 15 minutes are kind of awkward, and then after that you're blitzing through, and now I've got 5 transit cards in my wallet or something. But how do you make a car version of that that's easy to port between? Our reaction to that, and I really applaud Toyota for asking these questions from us 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when it was like, gee, I don't know. We better start thinking about that. Well, we think a lot about it now, and so to Rick's point, we think about durability. There's certain colors that don't work for us because they show dirt. The materials that the Think is made out of that are dent resistance, recycled plastics and composites, those help a lot. Parkability, so the footprint really matters. How do I get the most package in the smallest space really matters. And by the way, I have more than one friend, so I might need a back seat. Things like that matter. And so, the IQ has done some pretty genius things in that regard. But then, how do we use connectivity to deliver function and features that matter? So, again, John, I think from San Francisco, talked about checking the traffic app. I mean, that should pipe into the nav display so you know exactly what's ahead of you. It's got my destinations, they're secure, the next user can't see them, things like that. So it's ported my preferences, my playlists, my addresses, my destinations, and can bring that with me with my reservations and my secure access via my smartphone or card. And it's completely blind to the next person. That's a pretty attractive connected car.
And Susan, over the years, I know you've done
Yes.
many car
I've started
sharing.
and run too, so
Yeah.
so durability
And-
is huge. It's totally huge. But I don't want to repeat a lot of what other folks said because I think they've nailed a lot of it. I think interoperability when you go to put your telematics into the vehicle is really critical. And I think also being able to stream into the CAN bus, making that easier for operations is really critical, particularly, Bill, as we move into using electric vehicles, alternative fuel vehicles more, being able to track and understand those better, somehow making it more seamless for the car sharing organizations to link into the CAN would be great. Parking. So you mentioned traffic, streaming traffic. I think streaming real-time parking information into the vehicle would be really critical. So with neighborhood car sharing, you go into and out of the same lot. One way, you're moving all over the place, but also when you're renting or accessing a short-term vehicle that goes into and out of the same lot, a one-way model, you still often need to find parking. And I think linkages to things like SF Park, which is a dynamically available parking system here in San Francisco, linking to that I think would be critical as well as traffic information.
Great. Well, that just triggered another question. Okay, so I think we all agree that we're going to see car sharing in a lot of ways become ubiquitous in the city. Does car sharing start to shape the way cities are designed or redesigned over time? Do you start cutting out space for car sharing and eliminating space for individually owned cars? Is that going to happen? I assume it's happening here. I don't know that it's happening in other places. I'm very curious as to that. Unless anybody wants to join in, that's
Well,
great.
can I just say some stuff about car sharing and car sharing benefits?
Yeah.
Because I really want to say that because I think this ties really closely to Mark's comments about the DePaul University taxation study, which I collaborated on. Really, really amazing study that looked at that, but also to the parking benefits. So from a policy standpoint, car sharing has been documented. We did a 2008 study at UC Berkeley. These guys all participated among many other car sharing organizations. And here's some data, Bill, that came out of that study. 4 to 6 vehicles actually sold per car sharing vehicle put on the ground. 9 to 13 vehicles taken off the road, combination of sold vehicles and postponed purchases from a single car sharing vehicle. We see things like 25% of people from that survey said that they actually sold a car due to car sharing. 25% said that they postponed a vehicle purchase due to car sharing. That totals up to 50%. We saw everything ranging from 27% to 43% reduction in CO2 emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, and vehicle miles, vehicle kilometers traveled. The reason why there's a range like that is our methodology took into account what people would do if they actually postponed a purchase. So that the higher end of that spectrum, that 47%, actually takes into account both the sold cars as well as postponed cars. So these are pretty dramatic numbers for those of us who study transportation alternatives and look for benefits. And I think we need to do a better job of communicating these benefits directly to policymakers in the context of climate change, cap and trade programs, possibly getting some of those funds directed towards shared use expansion, towards parking management, taxation issues. So that was something I really, really wanted to say earlier, because we've got hard data. These are serious numbers that came from a North American survey that was done in 2008. These are notable numbers that I think should be used in a policy context. And in terms of land use, I think the parking connections, we're going to see stronger connections to that bill. I know San Francisco is working on a shared use vehicle policy, trying to really expand the number of on-street spaces, and we need to just do more of that. But I think we can't forget about the social and environmental benefits that are delivered with the car sharing concept in particular.
I want to build on that, and this is for all of you. Okay, what kind of shifts in regulation, investment, and policy really, really need to occur so we can make this work? So we can really find an exit strategy to be totally self-sufficient.
I think Rick might want to jump in. Did you want to jump in? And then
There's a couple of things. First of all, enlightened municipalities are already driving some of the policy initiatives. There's not enough of them out there doing this, but there are people who get it. As far as making car sharing having car sharing be in new communities or having policy more spaces for car sharing. San Francisco has had policy since 2006, which requires car sharing in new developments of a certain size. Other cities have now taken similar, have put in similar policies. Just this last year, for the first time that I'm aware of, we got car sharing into the federal transportation bill. That's very, very important because it not only opens up car sharing to being able to get more grants or more money, but it also will start a definitional process. As Mark pointed out very well earlier, there's issues of insurance, taxation, policy that are real issues for the car sharing movement. And I'm a big believer that you want to incent behaviors you want, and you need to create some disincentive for those you don't want. So we have to be very careful with policy building over time, and definition of what car sharing is part of that. I wanted to make one comment on multimodal transportation as well, because I think that's very important for policy. This isn't just about car sharing. It's about how people get around and how they can get around better, not just in cities, but in other areas as well, college campuses being a big one. So peer-to-peer car sharing isn't car sharing in the older sense, but it is an expansion. There are all these apps and other ways of accessing transportation within cities. It's all part of the solution, but it's getting ahead of policy. At this point, cities are struggling, quite frankly, to deal with the collaborative consumption and sharing economy environment, and policy is lagging behind some of the innovations that are coming up in this area.
Thank you. Okay, you want to take questions? You guys don't mind? We'll just take some questions now? Yeah, go ahead. Here. I'm going to be a host here.
I My name is Orson Watson. I work for the Garfield Foundation. So I'm coming from a philanthropic perspective where we fund a lot of transit equity, transit advocacy issues around low-income urban communities. So, you know, the notion of car sharing has tremendous implications for this when we're talking about how do you get low-income people to work, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that I find a little, well, I find it sort of interesting that, you know, probably because you're coming from an automobile industry, the income of your end user is sort of predetermined. So you said, oh, we all go to college, we all drive to this, we all live, that's people in a certain socioeconomic group. But what I do not hear is, I do not hear you talk about choosing car sharing as a choice, choosing not to own a car, but to share it as a choice. But there's a very large segment of the population of America who would choose car sharing because they can't afford a car. And I see that as tremendous opportunities for the whole notion of car sharing, but I don't hear any of you including that in your business models.
I work with the University of Missouri at Kansas City. Kansas City inner city is one of the poorest inner cities in the United States. We're addressing that directly. We don't have good solutions. Not just that, it's the whole idea of sustainability and of the inner city poor and how you go with that.
We probably spend more time on the choice element because that's the hardest perception to break. Clearly, at the core is, as Susan said, well-documented research on commute trip reduction, on CO2 reduction and greenhouse gases. Again, car purchase deferment, more walking, more transit usage. Again, the testimonies we get from members on, let me tell you how you changed my life. I can afford another bedroom in the city. My partner doesn't have to work a second job. I lost 5,000 pounds because I shed my SUV and I lost 25 pounds walking more. That benefit on affordability, our average member saves over $600 a month versus owning a car. And to your point, if you say, well, they couldn't have contemplated owning one, okay, then they only gave themselves half that raise, or they had freedom and mobility options that they didn't have before. But I know Rick can speak to this too. We are in so many working class urban neighborhoods that really are the lifeblood of what we do, in addition to folks that literally shed Aston Martins to use the service. There aren't that many, I can probably count them on one hand, but there are thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands more that are really making city livability affordable and solving those problems that you're raising.
But are you building a business strategy around that? Is my main question. Because, so for example, NSTAR is being used by used car companies to get rid of the repo man. You don't pay your car bill, they can simply just shut your car down. And that's a very conscious business strategy. I'm sort of curious, are you actually building a strategy around attacking that income segment of the market?
Yeah, our focus is on community development. I mean, the mission is enabling simple and responsible urban living. So is the focus in and of itself 100% on underserved communities? No. Is that part of our expansion as we grow adoption? Absolutely.
Yeah, just real quickly, this is a huge issue in the car sharing discussions that go around all around the world. And there are certain areas where car sharing makes money and certain areas where car sharing doesn't. I don't mean geographical areas. I mean because of performance, because of cost. Different parts of the world, insurance and liability costs are much lower than in other parts of the world. So all of that comes into effect here. But are there programs in car sharing? Absolutely. Zipcar has absolutely expanded into a lot of other areas. Here locally, we have our community share program, which is oriented toward low and moderate income people. So we're bringing them into car sharing. We work with affordable housing developments, and we're putting cars in every affordable housing development that wants them so that we can serve that community. We have our Access Mobile program, which is wheelchair accessible vans that are made available for the disabled community. So we are looking at underserved communities, and we are very actively doing advocacy and education where we can.
And I really appreciate your comment. And I've studied this industry for a long time, and there is a lot of discussion about it. It tends to not be what is featured in a particular panel or topic, but this discussion is happening also around the concept of peer-to-peer. It's also happening in the concept of one-way. So I know there's been a lot of discussions when Car2Go, for instance, is going into a city to make sure that when they zone that area where they go in, that they're actually also going into lower income areas. And this discussion is also very active in the public bike sharing community. So, you know, we should probably try to do a better job of making sure we also bring this up. But I think it's in part just because I think a lot of our message is about choice, but I do think choice is being integrated towards other segments than just college students and young adults coming out of college.
I have a question. Is this mic on? Okay. I'm Neil Pierce of the Washington Post Writers Group. Now, I've been writing occasionally about car sharing even since Robin Chase was chewing my ear off about it several years ago. And I think it's a fascinating concept, and I personally, I'm a Zipcar member. But I'm wondering, and I wonder if you all could give me an overall view of those who are looking from outside at this movement of the car sharing and then the peer-to-peer. How fast has it been growing, and what is the outlook for it to have a really substantial impact on the transportation choices that are made and on automobile usage and patterns and on the development of cities? I just don't have a sense for that, how fast it's growing, or if new steps need to be made and undertaken for it to grow much more rapidly.
I think we all should take a stab at this question. We're often asked this question, and I think the potential is phenomenal, particularly when you look at the addition to neighborhood car sharing of all of these other types of models like peer-to-peer and one-way. I haven't seen a study that collectively looks at the expansion capabilities of all of those, but I know there's been a lot of people throwing around numbers. I did a study a number of years ago that came up with a number of 7.5% of the population of urban areas with drivers over the age of 21 being the total market capability of this. At this time, I think that number would be higher than that because of the capabilities of peer-to-peer to now go into suburban and rural areas. And I also think the one-way model, which we don't know much about yet, is probably capturing a whole different market segment than we understand yet. So I think there's a tremendous growth potential, but something does seem to be holding it back. And I think that's in part capital costs. I also think insurance costs. I think parking costs, taxation issues. And I think a key question in transforming transportation is, how can public policy and governmental support at the local level, regional level, state and federal, international levels come together to help accelerate the deployment of these things? I've been looking at this a long time, and I thought we would be beyond the 1 million mark at this point for North America. I don't think we're behind, but I think we could be a lot further ahead if there was more support from a policy standpoint.
Just from a Zipcar standpoint, we invested in Wheels, a peer-to-peer service, earlier this year and made a minority investment in the business because we think it is very interesting and is a big part of a larger, broader solution. And to Susan's point on penetration, when we've seen neighborhoods display upwards of 15 or even 20% penetration of Zipcar membership in certain areas, we say, wow, that could be certain parts of town. How do we extend that uptake in larger areas and through a combination of a more expanded service definition with peer-to-peer? Why has it not happened more in the last few months? I think Susan hit some of the issues, insurance and awareness and mindset. But we've definitely got skin in the game and are paying real close attention to it.
One of the points I'd like to make on this is that the kind of car sharing that has been popular and has expanded in North America has been a model that is either transit-oriented or cars-on-demand oriented. And it has been an innovation. It continues to be new and is driving the market. One of the reasons I think that's important is we see the OEMs we see rental car agencies, we see new small startups all trying to find a way to get into this idea of sharing a vehicle so that you don't have to own your own. So quite frankly, the fact that, that car sharing isn't bigger is partly because there are market gaps that need to be filled in different ways, and those market gaps are being filled by some new and not necessarily well-established businesses. So, there's a peer-to-peer taxi kind of idea going on. It is all of these things provide more options so that people can drive less, don't have to own a car, can get around a city in a greener, more socially responsible way, but also with a lot more convenience. And so I think all of those things together are going to help car sharing actually grow even faster in the future.
I can't speak to the car sharing business model or policy issues because I'm just not close enough to that industry. But I think one of the things, especially in the U.S. consumer, the automobile, maybe not for the the 19-year-olds like my son, but so much, but for most of us, the automobile is a very personal device. And I think one of the things that we can do to create greater acceptance is with the use of technology. So, and obviously, coming from Qualcomm, I would obviously say this, and one of the best ways to do that is this device we all carry around on us, called our smartphone or our phone. A lot of times now has all our personal contacts. It has our music, has our entertainment, has movies, and so on. If the automobile, kind of back to Bill's question earlier, what's the right feature set in a shared automobile? When I step into the vehicle or sit into the vehicle, if that vehicle and my smartphone now become one integrated solution that I don't have to do anything, it's all my infotainment is right there because my phone and that automobile have synced, and I can use the applications that are on my phone, or I can use my phone, in other words, for navigation, for all my infotainment. I think at least that will help kind of close the market gap perhaps a little bit, where people feel that they've now brought a little bit of themselves, or they've customized that car to them, made it a little more personal. And I think technology can do that. So it can help do that. Obviously, it's not going to do it by itself, but it can help contribute to that, improving that user experience. And again, just kind of based on personal impression that we in our automobiles have a thing. It's kind of the American consumer mindset.
Great. Rashik Zuri from Mercedes-Benz Research and Development, specifically in the Business Innovation Group. So thank you, Susan, for mentioning Car2Go throughout the day. It's great to see the rest of you guys up there. I have two questions. First of all, I know we're definitely a supporter of peer-to-peer ride sharing. And we kind of envisioned that eventually there might be a hybrid solution between car sharing and ride sharing. So for example, Zipcar not only will have car sharing, but you can utilize carpooling within Zipcar. So what are your thoughts about that, of having a hybrid solution? And then the second question is state legislators are really, really pounding down on these ride-sharing programs like Uber, Lyft, and so forth. How can we all work together to kind of go against them, not go against them, but work with the policymakers to say, listen, this is the way of the future, and we should be supporting this rather than beating down on them?
To the first question on ride sharing, Zipcar's had a partnership with Zimride for a while now, and they help aggregate people going to different places and take those trips in Zipcar, so you can start a ride pool without a car. And we've also done something called Zip Together, which encourages Zipcar members, Zipsters we call them, to crowdsource destinations. So if you're going to a concert, again, Zip Together to get there and cut the costs. So definitely see seamless, again, to some of the themes that have been raised here, more options, more flexibility, more intermodality. As it relates to your other question on regulation, I'll turn it over to the rest of the group, but there's a lot of consternation these days on cities, and particularly with the taxi regulations and what's going on with Lyft and Sidecar and Uber.
Yeah, there's a really interesting model, innovative startup companies trying to do new things with technology. And quite frankly, again, policy's lagging. Policy doesn't exist to support, or quite frankly, even to know if it's a barrier in place. In the case of Lyft and Sidecar, does everybody know what those services are? Some people have called it P2P taxi. It's effectively you're in your own car, and through a matching service through an app, you can pick somebody else up along the way and get them to their destination. Because of certain laws, you can request a donation rather than actually get paid for it. And so those are effectively how they work. Uber's a little bit different. Uber's a dispatch system effectively for limos. But right now, at least in California, the CPUC is concerned. They're concerned for people's safety. They're concerned for how it will be used. Obviously, taxi services and policymakers are trying to understand more about what its impact is. The point I want to make is that these innovations are very important, even if something doesn't work. The innovations are driving the multimodal movement, if you will. The sharing economy is going to include and continue to include services that don't make it and don't work. They're going to include ones that bring us to a new level. And I think, again, it's going to be a matter of policy and innovators getting together and figuring out what is helping us meet our community goals, as well as people's personal needs as far as transportation is concerned.
Okay, we're a little over time. All of these folks will be around during the break. I encourage you to chase them down, stalk them, get your answers. Thanks.